Hello and welcome to Leo Sayso's Pantheon, a fortnightly podcast with me, your host, Leo Saysos. Please support me by liking, subscribing and sharing. Today I'm in conversation with Frederick, a magician from Melbourne in Australia. We will be discussing the state of magic in the 21st century. Hello Matt.
Hi Leo, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. Finally got you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. It's no end of trouble with Skype, it seems.
I use a Chromebook, which is like this weird, mysterious world of halfway technology. It reminds me of using a Mac in the early 90s.
Right.
What it does really well, but there's a lot it can't do.
Yeah. I sound a bit odd today. I don't know whether it's like hay fever season or anything. My throat keeps tightening up, so...
That's alright. I've come down with an absolute killer of a cold today, so
really?
I'm surrounded by Lemsip and various other items to try and keep my voice going.
Yeah, well, you need it. It's quite a bad one.
In another life, I do other radio broadcasting that's not podcasting, music related. I did a 2-hour show today, and my voice nearly died completely, but it should be a bit better now. But my day job's something else entirely. But I'm one of those guys with a few different strings to his bow. It's always one of those things. If I never trust people only do one thing. If especially when you're an occultist, they're just an occultist, and that's their entire life. There's probably some extra work they could be doing. Just like if you, if you meet a musician and all they do is practice guitar, you go, that's nice, but what the fuck are you going to write a song about?
Well, we were having this conversation with my partner yesterday because I'm a counsellor at one of the universities in Nottingham, and I recently did a commission because I'm an illustrator as well, and I took it to work and I was showing people, and then people were like, "Oh, it's really interesting. I'm quite surprised that you balance this sort of psychotherapy stuff with the illustration." My partner was saying it always baffles me why people are so surprised when people have more than one thing that they actually do. Doesn't make sense to me. I couldn't just be doing one thing.
Bob Dylan is an industrial welder and makes iron gates for fun, you wouldn't necessarily expect that, but was it Bob Wilson who said specialisation is for insects?
Yeah. Although it was quite interesting, a sort of very much later interview he gave. He was saying, I sometimes regret being a generalist. And I think the interview was taken back quite a bit because he was like, oh really? Because your entire life's work really has been about being a generalist in that sense. And I don't know whether it was just because as he's getting older and reflecting on his life and thinking, is the grass greener? Because he did have a lot of academic potential. But it is interesting.
I actually had a friend who interviewed Bob Wilson towards the latter part of his life. It was the early days of technology. This friend of mine was working for Disinfo at the time.
Right.
And he interviewed Bob purely by email. And then a couple of years later, Bob emailed him back and said, by the way, I never answered any of your questions. I just gave them to my friends to answer for me. And then he sent another email and said, but was that a lie? So my friend of mine's never sure if he actually communicated with Bob directly or not.
Ah. Which is the kind of games that you like playing, isn't it? So.
Exactly.
Yeah. He was like the ultimate trickster bit, the non-malign trickster.
Oh, tricksters tend to oscillate between one and the other from time to time. I mean, you wouldn't get...
That's true.
I mean, if you ever read the news out of Ghana, they're very serious about the belief in the Illuminati, and you wouldn't get that if Bob had introduced the idea back in a discourse as a prank. But it ties back in, in Africa in general. If you're causing being involved in occultism, it's actually risking your life. Even in South Africa, particularly near the borders now, or alien, you keep that close to yourself because someone could accuse of witchcraft and you're in a world of trouble.
Yeah. Well, I sort of look back at the history of the occult, and it seems to have that thread, even in sort of Western history, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. Not always. Sometimes, it's part of what humans do. I don't think you can be a human being without being involved in occultism at some level.
No, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I remember in supervision, this was a couple of years ago, my counselling supervisor was asking a little bit about what I do outside of the work, and I was just saying I've got an interest in the occult and magic, And I remember
Yeah.
the reaction that I got was very much just, that's all very dark and edgy stuff. And I just thought, it's so dismissive and a complete misinterpretation of it. And that's usually like the mainstream perspective of it, that it's this dark,
Yeah.
edgy thing. And it's like magic is involved in all of our lives. It just depends whether you're willing to acknowledge that, I suppose, and what your understanding of that is.
Exactly. What I actually do if people ask me about it, because often people see if I'm on the train, I might have my little odd books that I read. If people ask me, I say my interest is in Gnostic Neoplatonism, and that either shuts them up because they don't know what I'm talking about, or we can have a proper conversation. If I said magic, it would be
there's a lot. It's a
strange world.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of sort of just instant assumptions that word brings. Whether it's something to be frightened of or something to be scoffed at, largely because, you know, it is a word that's been taken up by more mainstream New Age people or groups. And it's become a bit naff in some respects as well.
Yeah. It's always funny to see how different ideas infiltrate into the various New Age groups. I mean, you know, the classic example is always that the AMORC, who everyone's uncle was a member of at some point, took their apostolic succession from the OTO. That was their legitimacy as a Rosicrucian order. They had a charter from the OTO. That was it.
Right.
And they were incredibly mainstream. They still are in some areas. You know, if you go down to San Jose, every school kid goes to their museum, apparently.
Right. You said that one of the things that you really wanted to perhaps talk about was magic and the occult in the 21st century. Where would you like to start with that?
Well, I suppose that's in some ways been my journey. I'm one of those guys who's now, you know, I can see middle age coming up ahead like the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
And so I got involved in magic, I suppose, in the late to mid 90s when things like technology were very new and exciting. You know, you had things like the Z cluster. I'm not sure if you're familiar with who they were.
No.
Let's see if I can give you a little bit of context. What we'll do is we'll start at the very beginning. So
yeah, go for it.
Well, yeah. So I was born in the late 70s in a largely Catholic household.
Yeah.
Irish Catholic with various degrees of oscillation between taking it seriously and not caring too much about it. I suppose my first introduction to occultism, like a lot of kids, is you just go through the school library, and it's amazing what ends up in the school library. And I quickly realised when I was 12 that, you know, you could get more reliable pictures of nude ladies by looking up books of witchcraft than you could by looking up biology textbooks, you know. So you start to get familiar with these ideas, and then, like everyone, I got involved in Dungeons and Dragons. It was the thing at the time, and so you want to make your games more interesting, and you start looking up books. And again, I think every school library was required to have a copy of the good old Encyclopedia of Man, Myth and Magic.
Right.
So you go that. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It was I suppose it was collectible magazine series in the 70s that built up to an encyclopedia. Then they published it in a hardbound edition that a lot of libraries would order, and had a lot of entries on comparative religion, but a lot on occultism as well. I remember, you know, looking up Aleister Crowley in that when I was a wee fella, looking up initial ideas about the Kabbalah, Alexander's, Gerald Gardner, all those kinds of guys.
Yeah.
So you're a teenager becoming used to those kinds of ideas.
This is like a series that would come out regularly that eventually became a hardback book. Right.
Yeah, like your Funk and Wagnalls, you collect it every week, and eventually you've got a book, an encyclopedia of religion and occultism, and then it became, for some reason, nearly every school library had a copy. Definitely here in Australia, I think it was a UK publication. So if you go down to your local library, you might find they've got it there as well.
Yeah, I'll have a look out for that. I don't think I've ever heard of it. Man, Myth and Magic.
The Encyclopedia of Man, Myth and Magic. That's right.
I'll have a look out for it.
And you become familiar with ideas. Look, was it Richard Cavendish's books were easy to find. William Seabrook's Witchcraft, Its Power in the World Today. Remember a friend lending me a copy of that and being fascinated at these descriptions of Aleister Crowley. And he knew older Aleister Crowley, knew him in his period when he was in America, and took a magical retirement on a island near New York, and all these amazing stories. You start to wonder, who is this fascinating fella? I ended up accidentally buying a copy of his Magic in Theory and Practice because I knew the name and liked the title, and I thought from the title it'd be a nice, easy beginner's book, but of course it's not. It jumps into deep post-God and Dawn Kabbalah pretty much straight away with the descriptions, the formulas of ERO and Kabbalistic breakdowns of the Tetragrammaton. Very, very technical book.
Yeah.
And it confused me, but I like to keep the copy in my room, up on the bookshelf, so that if people came around to see me, they'd ask questions, why have you got this book about magic there? So it becomes part of, who you are. And, I had some idea that would impress girls if I brought them round. Never really did, but, I still kept it there. Had a little ceramic gargoyle that would sit on top of it.
But it's like you say, you kind of integrate these texts into your identity at this point as it begins to emerge, don't you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what a magician does,
Yeah.
creating identity for themselves.
Yeah.
Magic is more than anything else about transforming the magician more than it is changing the world.
Yeah, I think so.
Then I suppose, then my story goes on. I discovered quite quickly some books on Wicca,
Yeah.
which I found amusing. But living in the Southern Hemisphere, you quickly realise that they don't work because, the sun goes in a different direction. What way do you cast your circle? It just seemed a little bit of an odd fit.
Right.
From there, so I tried some solo practice in that. It was fun to get out a set of tarot cards and do readings with my friends, but it was just a party trick. Then I found some books on Golden Dawn techniques, Llewellyn publications mostly, people like Herbie Brennan and John Michael Craig, and practiced them quite diligently. Did the Middle Pillar and Lesson Banishing Ritual the Pentagram every day for months. Started to wonder why they're so specific about the form they were using. And at the time, I was at university studying, amongst other things, comparative religion.
Yeah.
A very unique course. My lecturers including, authorities and people like Rene Guénon and Friedrich Schuon. So I had a different perspective on things and started to wonder why there was such a emphasis on these forms. And then through, it can't even be Google because Google didn't exist at the time, probably Alta Vista, I discovered a whole bunch of images that led me onto chaos magic. And I love the idea that the forms don't matter, it's the essentials, it's what you do.
Yeah.
So at the time, it was really interesting. Even though I was discovering a lot of stuff mostly through online means, I never thought anything was real unless I had a book. Even I was studying chaos magic, which was a very online modality at the time, I had to go to my local bookshop and get them to hunt around and order in a copy of Liber Null and Liber Chaos and all those kinds of odd texts.
So by having
Because
the
I
text, that solidified
Yeah,
it
it
for
wasn't
you.
real unless I had a hard copy.
Yeah.
At the same time, there was a lot of internet magic going on. So I mentioned before there was a group called the Z Cluster. Some people out there will remember them. They were essentially just a mailing list. They claimed to be a chaos magic group. It mostly was a series of flame wars and arguments that you couldn't follow. You'd get about 500 emails a day. I joined that under about 6 different names that I can't even remember, and occasionally posted, occasionally read, changed email addresses constantly because I'd subscribe and my inbox would be full and my email address would be suspended in the same day. But, it was a very, very odd thing, the Z Cluster.
Well, it sounds very
Frankly,
similar
not-
to bloody Facebook groups and social media groups now, to be honest. Everyone getting into those flame wars and...
Yeah. It was very similar, except that no one is doing things under their real names.
Yeah.
People would often have 5 or 6 different identities
Yeah.
that they use.
And then you'd find out, like,
discovered
years
that-
later, it was him all along.
Yeah. Or I've met people in real life who I realise were on there at the time now. People from the States who I've been able to meet at various gatherings and conferences. So it was a very exciting time. And at the time, the whole idea that you could do magic over the internet was strange. The idea that people do a ritual through sending emails to each other, or
Yeah.
do rituals through. Well, at the time it was teleconferencing. It was very exciting and new, and it felt radical, which is a big difference to today, where the online world is an extension of the everyday world, and for a lot of people, perhaps is even more real than their everyday world. It's where they
Sure.
get to create a personality, create themselves, and I suppose every Facebook profile is in itself a magical working. It's a way of invoking a new self.
Absolutely.
At the time, yeah, we tried, I suppose everyone tried to be very conscious of that. And you had amazing websites like the Chaos Matrix, which is still up incidentally, has been updated in about 13 years, but that was the great depository of chaos magic lore that everyone would visit to learn things from. And Phil Hine was very active online at the time. What was his name? Zimon Yolster, Joseph Max 555 with the Autonomatrix. All these crazy characters, and you'd email them and they disappear. And it was an exciting time for magic.
Sure. It sounded like probably the first time in history where people with similar interests had been able to come together.
Exactly. Before that, had, we now know that Alistair Crowley was a great letter writer and maintained voluminous correspondence with people around him, and that's how people were connected to him in many ways. Some people who perhaps claimed a succession from him never met him but communicated with him through mail.
Yeah.
And at the time, there was skepticism. Is the digital realm genuine communication? What's going on here? What does it mean? And there are whole theories of, the internet is a spirit, or the internet is a servitor, and we can summon the internet and invoke the internet. Because it was something that was actually took a long time to learn what it was. It's not like, I suppose now I look at kids who are just getting old enough to buy a drink at the bar, and they're digital natives. They can't imagine a world where this was new.
It's just become so integrated that it's not as hyper normalized, isn't it?
And the fact that it's so pervasive, especially with the introduction of smartphones. I can remember when going online, being on the internet was a discrete activity separate from everyday life. But now, even when we're not playing Pokemon, we're still living in an augmented reality, which is a magical act in and of itself.
Yeah.
So it's changed a lot. The way you can access information is much easier. Again, I lived in the country, so I can remember, I didn't drive at the time, getting on a train, riding on the train for 2.5 hours, walking 45 minutes to go to a mysterious bookshop to buy the book I wanted, which had a piece of information that I was interested in, and then I'd walk back on the train and ride 2.5 hours back home. That was how you access information. It wasn't quick. And there's not to say that now is worse or then was better or vice versa. It's just different.
Yeah. It's a different exercise, it's a different experience, but it's sometimes something I forget because the internet, because I'm only 28, so the internet has been part of my life, practically all of it, that there's always this anxiety, and I think this is not just for me personally, but for a lot of people, as if you don't quite know enough, and there's this craving to know more, and almost this anxiety and insecurity that you can't quite compete. I don't want to compete personally, but there's always that sort of drive because there's so much information on the internet. Whereas previously in history, you could go and get that book and you'd spend, like you say, that would be like a once in a month event where you'd pick up a book and you'd read through it, and that would be your source of information for that month. The internet has become so accessible that nothing's ever quite good enough. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, very true. You're always looking to go beyond, looking for the next thing. And you see that in places like Twitter, where hashtags trend all around the world and disappear within 6 hours.
Yes, exactly.
You try and mention the joke 6 hours later, and you're behind the times, Daddy. You've missed the train.
Yeah, you can't keep up with everything, and there's this constant anxiety about needing to keep up with it all. Whereas, before the internet, it was a case, books would come out few and far between, and you could keep up with it. There's a pace to it, but it just doesn't feel like that anymore, and it's a lot of pressure on people.
Very much so. I mean, you see that in areas like the chaos magic field. I mean, at the time, with places like the Z cluster, they would move along very quickly, but the essentials, the core, remained very solid. But nowadays, for example, I suppose that particular field has moved a lot. In the early 2000s, it was pretty similar to what it always was. A little bit of dabbling in quantum physics, people having lots of fun with what they called paradigm shifting and flexible belief, and people jacking off over little squiggles of paper. Now you get people like Gordon White, who takes things like the Grimoire tradition and the reality of spirits very, very seriously.
Yeah.
Audrey Vitmus, who, as well as being a chaos magician, has got a American hoodoo lineage that he's very proud of and is an important part of the way he works. There's a lot more involved in these things, and it can change very, very quickly. It's changed in the last few years.
Yeah, it has.
You had the rise with Trump of what they called meme magic and the little frog icon, and that seems to have disappeared now. It came and it went. And
yeah, it came and went. It was a powerful icon.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think of that on that note? Because obviously a lot of online occult culture now has become politicized, and that Pepe the Frog icon became a symbol of the alt-right essentially. And my idea of the occult and magic really was that it was apolitical. It was something that it's not that there couldn't be a political element to it, but it certainly wasn't the primary foundation of it. But it's almost become very politicized in a lot of online circles now.
It very much has. I mean, you even get movements on the other spectrum of the Bind Trump movement, where people, including apparently Lana Del Rey, take part in simultaneous rituals to curse Donald Trump, which is a wonderful thing to read about. You know, it's great. It doesn't matter what happens to Trump, they'll always be able to claim success, which is one of the little secrets of magic. As long as he has any slight dip in anything, they'll say they caused it. Yeah. Which isn't to say it doesn't work, it's just that's the nature of magic.
Sure.
It is odd that it becomes so overtly political. There's always been an element of that. Famously, McGregor Mathers from the Golden Dawn was also part of a very active movement which claimed that the throne of England was illegitimate and it needed to go back 200 years to a different dynasty.
Yeah.
Aleister Crowley wrote for German propaganda magazines, but he claimed he was doing it on the behalf of the English Secret Service.
Yeah, there's a disinfo.
There's a wonderful book, Secret Agent 666, which supposes he might have been a spy.
Yeah.
Hard to tell. I don't know if he was an active agent. He probably had contacts because occultists are useful in the espionage world, I suppose. They can get to places other people can't.
I can imagine it to be something, there'd be something in that. But like you say, will we ever know? Probably not. Yeah, it's something I can imagine.
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah.
But there's always been, I suppose, that element there, but it's become so overt. There are some people who take part in what you consider a magical act, but don't consider themselves magicians. They just consider it a political action.
Yeah.
I mean, the opening of the English Parliament is very much a magical ritual. We have pretty much the same Westminster system, the same ritual here in Australia, a few variations, of course, but that's a magical act to try and, I suppose, link this Parliament with the ancient crown.
Yeah.
Potentially. But magic is at the heart of our political system. Whatever you think of the American dollar bill, there's always those kinds of actions going on. That's what, I suppose, some modern conspiracy theorists and magicians are trying to emphasize, that if all action is magical action, then political action even more so.
Well, this is the interesting thing as well, isn't it, where conspiracy culture ends up perhaps taking things too literally, and that's not to say that there aren't conspiracies. There certainly are, and there always has been. Any group of human together, you will find some form of a conspiracy in there, but the idea of like an Illuminati, like almost like an omnipresent, all-powerful group that controls everything, to me just seems like a too literal interpretation of what magic sees as a more subtle, subconscious, or even collective unconscious ripple throughout culture, throughout society, where you will get these symbols sure, but whether that is necessarily a conscious act, I'm not convinced by that. These symbols come from somewhere subconsciously, and they're not necessarily chosen because they're part of a secret society.
It's the way that people communicate,
Yes.
and a circle's a powerful symbol regardless of what else you put in with it. A triangle is a powerful symbol no matter what else you do with it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that someone's trying to communicate with a defined language. It's not like when, I don't know, Jay-Z makes a triangle over his eyes, he's saying, I'm an agent. He just knows that it draws attention, it draws the eye.
Yeah.
Symbols have meaning, but I suppose it's almost the difference between a symbol and a signifier, a signal and a sign, if that makes sense. A sign means a specific thing.
Yeah.
A signal is an attempt to convey meaning.
We'll take the Jay-Z example then, when he puts sort of his hand over his eye, and a lot of conspiracy theorists would say yes, but that can be, Lady Gaga, I know for certain that she's done that. Miley Cyrus has done similar behaviour. So it becomes like, are they signalling something to each other? But it's a pretty shit secret, isn't it? If they're all doing this. It's just, I think these symbols become popularised, and they kind of know that they're antagonising and provoking something to a degree.
It reminds me of, in Aleister Crowley's system of the AA, when you take the Oath of the Abyss, you swear to take everything you see as a direct signal from the universe to yourself.
Yes.
And that's the mistake people can fall into. They take the Oath of the Abyss too early. They don't know how to interpret this information. They try and find meaning in all things, and all things have meaning, and one of the great things magicians do is create meaning in things around them that serves them.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to fall down the other end into a world of paranoia, where your interpretation of what's out there doesn't necessarily match with other people's. Maybe it doesn't match with reality. Whether or not reality is a thing, I suppose, is still a moot point. But it certainly doesn't match with the discourse, the conversation that's going on.
Which I wonder if that's where it kind of fell into becoming overly politicised on the internet, because people will get together and share these paranoias, and obviously they then catch on as trends, and people do feel, from the left and the right in their own way, disempowered politically in various different ways. And it's a way to feel that I understand that we're all being fucked over, and to rationalise that feeling.
Which is a perfectly valid feeling, and it's perfectly valid to look for meaning in actions around you. You've just got to come up with a method through which you can test this meaning. Maybe people are signaling. Maybe when Trump went to Dubai, they all put their hands in that glowing orb. That meant something to someone. That was a very mysterious thing to go on.
It was really ominous, wasn't it?
It was very strange, Sometimes I see sites where they point out, for example, George W. Bush visiting the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and he's wearing a yarmulke or a kippah. They say, "See, he's got a secret." It's like, well, I've been there. You can't visit it without putting one on.
Yeah.
It means he's polite. That's a signal.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Gordon White, and I just wanted to pick up on, because I've got a lot of respect for Gordon White. I listen to his podcast regularly. But his primary theme at the minute, which he keeps returning to, is this idea of, like you say, he's got a very strong belief in spirits. But my interpretation of where he's going with his work is almost as if he's saying spirits in even your local vicinity or within different cultures are very separate entities to each other. And it moves away from the idea of comparative religion or comparative mythology, because he's wanting to almost respect and honour different cultures' spirits as entities of their own right. And I kind of half agree with him there. I see what he's trying to perhaps do in terms of creating a respect for different cultures, and because I know that he's spoke out about cultural appropriation and making sure that we understand that when we're taking occult or magical beliefs or rituals from other cultures, that we are respecting the context in which they come from. But I also think that you're kind of throwing the baby out of the bathwater in that paradoxically there are parallels between these spirit energies, whatever you want to kind of call them, globally.
That makes a lot of sense. I suppose the unusual thing that Gordon points out, and a number of people pointed out to me before, is that our culture, by which I mean, I suppose, the West in the 21st and late 20th century, or the West perhaps since the Enlightenment on a growing degree, is the only culture, really, in the history of the world that hasn't had a literal belief in spirits. We're unique by not engaging with spirits. And even if you go to Thailand today, you'll see little spirit shrines everywhere. Same with China. It's something very, very unusual. And I suppose the big question is, are we divorcing ourselves from our heritage? Is there value in going back to these spirits? Now, there are some people who still believe in these spirits. My grandmother had a St. Christopher medallion in her car. That's a belief in spirits. But we distance ourselves from it more and more and more. You don't have that personal relationship with them like you would see in what might be called traditional culture. So you first go, okay, let's take them seriously. And then you go, well, if I'm going to take this seriously, I've got to get rid of my own preconceptions about this. I can't go to Thailand and say, your particular spirit figure is just a representation of your oppressed id.
Sure.
So, just to completely make fun of Freudianism. You can't really do that. You've got to first engage with it on its own terms. And you even see that in the West in the rediscovery of our own saints. The saints.
You broke up a bit there. Could you just go back a little bit? Because you broke up, sorry.
Yeah, so in the West, we had our own spirits in the form of the saints. And the saints were very much their own thing. They had similarities with some pagan deities, but they most definitely weren't the same thing. They were their own entity. People engaged with it as its own thing, its own spirits, and then we cut ourselves off from these saints for whatever reason, political reasons, economic reasons, social reasons, when the Reformation took place. And it's almost a matter of recovering your own heritage. And these are amazing things. If you ever go through texts like the Golden Legend, these aren't some little pious guys who just sat around doing nothing but praying. They were badass. They'd go around and slay demons and cast out monsters and pluck out people's eyes. Amazing legends. And the idea was that they were alive. They were around you. You could talk to them. And through them, you could communicate directly with the ultimate divine principle of the universe. And what an amazing heritage to have. And yet, we cut it off. And we need to ask ourselves, why is that? Can we bring them back? Do we want them back? What is this reality of the spirits that is really only a few generations gone? What have we lost? Sure. And you might decide that we don't need them back. You might decide that we do, but you've got to engage with those questions if you want to. Well, certainly if you want to engage in the occult to any degree, and I think also if you want to engage in your own culture. You've got to understand what does my culture build up from? What is there? Why is it there?
So that makes a lot of sense. It's almost trying to step away from this pompous imperialistic attitude of projecting our own, almost like you say, the psychoanalytical interpretations of other people's cultural spirits, and actually look at our own and think, what value do they bring to our society and to our culture? We don't know that, but we need to look at it because we've lost it.
Yeah, you're right. We've lost them, and whether we want them back or not is almost a moot point. We owe it to ourselves to investigate what our own people believed for such a long time. Even if we go back to, pagan Rome, the idea that everyone had their own household gods. I remember as an early undergraduate reading the Aeneid, and the fact that it took the reality of these statues on the shelf, these household gods, as absolutely paramount. You have to save the household gods. was very powerful to consider. This is what people did at all levels of society.
It's interesting because I went to Croatia last year because my partner's from there, and she grew up in a sort of rural village in Croatia, not far from Zagreb, and we were walking sort of. There's a path that goes up from the church up into the hills at the top of the island, and along this path there are little shrines or dotted around where people would still take offerings, and they were very sort of Catholic based shrines, but it was still that people were engaging in that kind of practice, which is just alien to me as someone from Britain. There's just absolutely nothing like that here. But saying that, I do think that most people, particularly people from more working class areas, which is, you know, where I grew up and where I still am, they do have a belief in spirits. Most people, from my understanding, to some degree, either believe or like the idea of ghosts or the supernatural. And I think that that's sort of like a residual, it's a part of their psyche that this desire to be engaged on a magical, spiritual level can't be fully eliminated, despite how much we've tried to push for a literal, materialist, scientific perspective in our culture. It just won't die.
You're absolutely right. Spiritual beliefs are our heritage as human beings. Like I said, you know, it's not that many generations back that it started to disappear, with perhaps some exceptions like the Epicureans in the classical era. But it's what we do. It's how humans understand the world, and it's a very different level of understanding reality. You don't engage with the spirits like you do with your friend Bob who lives around the corner.
No.
They don't have that level of reality. You understand that they exist on almost a more real level of reality.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that. They're not literal beings. I can't say that I believe in spirits because I don't need to believe in them. For me, to believe in something is more along the lines of, have I got empirical evidence that this thing literally exists? For me, it's more of an implicit intuition. It's believing is more of a cognitive exercise. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Whereas spirits, to me, intuitively exist.
It's a no-eating exercise. It's a way of casting your gaze up out of Plato's cave. You know, it's starting by engaging with spirits is a way of climbing out of that cave and eventually seeing the sun itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a tragedy that we've lost this. You even see that in, I suppose, Chinese culture. Of course, you know, Mao pretty much took their entire culture away from them, and you often see, in my area, Chinese immigrants trying to rediscover what their culture was, and they're often engaged with people like Taiwanese or Singaporean immigrants for whom that culture was constantly living, and try and rediscover it. I suppose in the Jewish community, which I have some links with, you have that great loss in the middle of the 20th century where a lot of people were taken away from their tradition and they're now trying to rediscover what it was. There's a huge movement towards secularism, which is perhaps being reversed for some people, not for everyone. Kabbalah can be understood in many, many different ways, of course. Even in African American cultures, I find that a lot of people are trying to rediscover what their people did before they moved to the city. So, for example, my copy of the 6th and 7th Books of Moses is published by a publishing house in Chicago that is, I suppose, part of I don't want to say a Black Power movement, but equivalent to that, rediscovering their own heritage, and you rediscover your heritage in a magical way. Yeah.
So there seems to be a revival occurring across the globe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An understanding of what spirits are and what magical thinking is. I think, unfortunately, you know, we assume that magical thinking is superstition. You know, I wore red socks and Liverpool won, Therefore, if I wear red socks next week, Liverpool will win again. That's not magical thinking. That's misguided scientific thinking.
Yes.
Magical thinking is Manchester won or Liverpool won, and this is important to me, and this makes me live a better life. Ramsay Jukes / Lionel Snell has written some wonderful works about that kind of thinking and what magical thinking really is.
Is that Lionel Snell?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, he's
also writes under Ramsay Jukes.
Yeah, Ramsay Jukes, Lionel Snell, his work's really important to the field of magic, I think, because he takes he's just very good at articulating where he's coming from, and he does it in a non-antagonistic way. It feels approachable.
I suppose a rather more antagonistic approach to the same kind of thing. Ludwig Wittgenstein had a work that was unpublished during his life but is now available called Remarks on Fraser's Golden Bough,
right,
where he tries to make sense of magical thinking. Basically, if you remember the Golden Bough, the great late 19th, early 20th century work of anthropology and magic, it thought of magic as primitive science. They didn't understand the connections between things.
Yeah.
And Wittgenstein includes Fraser basically being more primitive than any, jungle tribesman ever for thinking that's how people thought. He pointed out, for example, that often a tribal rain dance would take place after the rains had already come. Magic is not just about hoping you can make things happen. It's about imparting meaning on things that are happening around you so that you can change yourself.
Yeah.
And become the best self you can be. And it's the same thing with spirits. Whether or not spirits have an actual existence, it means that that street out there, that tree over there, they're all significant and meaningful things that add to my story and make my life more significant, and means that I can achieve more than I could if I didn't have these beliefs.
Which I guess is why it was been so cracked down on by more monotheistic religions in history, or patriarchal religions, because they wanted people to go through their religion in order to reach the divine. Whereas magic and the occult has always been about personal empowerment, that development of the self and development of individuality.
Yeah. There's been some important work published in the last few years on ancient Jewish magic, and it points out that one of the big challenges of investigating this is they're constantly the texts at the time are constantly denying that they're taking part in magic. They might have incantation bowls, but it's like, no. This isn't summoning a spirit. We're not drawing images of demons to try and perform some magic. It's just, as Topol said, a tradition.
Yeah.
There's different ways, magical thinking can be integrated, whether it's, the good old classic, you open up the newspaper, thank you St. Jude for prayers answered. Prayer to St. Jude is a spell, but it's been sublimated within the overall cultural story, so it becomes less your story and more the story of all the people around you, which is itself not a bad thing, but magicians tend to be rather steadfast about their individuality sometimes.
Yeah. Definitely. Sometimes too much so. Did an interview with Vanessa Sinclair. I don't know whether you are aware of her work.
Yeah.
And she's also a psychoanalyst, but she's put in a lot of effort at the moment. I know she's setting up another conference in trying to emphasize and bring back to light the idea of the occult informing a lot of modern psychotherapy. Very much so. Well, it basically is the same field. It's just that it got a different name. But today's sort of modern psychotherapy, having worked in it, the idea of with cognitive behavioural therapy, they pathologise the idea of magical thinking, which, as you said earlier, that's a misinterpretation of what magical thinking actually is. But it's still something which is just widely dismissed. It's like forgetting who your mother is, I feel.
Yeah, well, as a old colleague of mine once pointed out, psychoanalysis is an initiatory tradition. Every psychoanalyst must go through the experience of analysis themselves in full before they can practice. So they learn in full. They're initiated by somebody who came before them. They're initiated by somebody who came before them, and so on down the chain of apostolic succession. And then you start to wonder, well, who initiated Freud?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it wouldn't have all started with him, and it certainly didn't, did it?
No. What's the what's the origin story? In most initiating traditions, eventually go back down to the divine. You know, even in the ecclesiastic Gnostic Catholic Church of the OTO, the priests and bishops of that will trace their lines of succession back to Saint Peter and Jesus Christ, even though they're taking part in what will be considered quite blasphemous rituals. That's how they get their authority. Sure.
Using certain figures in order to legitimise their position in the current context.
And there's always, in all these myths, there's always that divine origin. At one point, the fire was brought down from heaven, and then it gets passed along.
Yeah. We're coming to time, Matt.
I can talk.
No, it's been a really good chat. I've enjoyed it.
Kind of travelled a little bit. Sometimes you talk to people about this kind of idea of magic, and you start talking about looking up tables of correspondences and casting circles, but there's something far more fundamental going on, and I think it's important that all magicians recognise that, and all people who take part in initiatic traditions, whether it's the OTO or, I don't know, the Freemasons, or maybe the Church of Satan works that way these days. I don't really know anymore. They're an odd bunch.
The Church of Satan? I have no idea what they're up to at the minute, but I've had some interaction with them on Twitter, and they are.
Their Twitter account is marvellous. I've got to give them that.
Yeah.
You talk about the Church of Satan Twitter accounts, and they're probably going to flame me for saying this now, but they always say, no, we're not magical, refer to our foundation text, the Satanic Bible.
Yeah.
Then you go and pick up the Satanic Bible, and the last third is nothing but John Deasy Enochian calls, and the third before that is all practical guide to ritual, and all the atheist, we don't believe in magic stuff is all up the front. It's very, very strange text. Anton was a...
Well, I think that, if you
guy.
Genuinely sort of involved in the Church of Satan, then you've got to have a pretty good satirical sense of humour, and that's not dismissing it. I think that in many ways it is very serious to them, but it's
incredibly. It's
not without its satire and its humour element, which is an important part of magic as well, I think.
Look at Uncle Al, and his books are full of jokes.
Oh, absolutely.
It's kind of once you get them, especially the good old Book of Lies. That's absolutely hilarious. Once you start to realise what's going on.
It's like Robert Anton Wilson says. He's one of the greatest comedians that ever lived. He fooled everyone. Yeah. Or is he? Maybe.
Yeah, and like I said, I've met Satanists and people from breakaway groups from it all, and my God, can they tell a joke?
Yeah.
It's rather marvellous, and I suppose that's one of the great things I loved about chaos magic back in the day. It was at the end of your ritual, have a good laugh. Don't worry about closing the pentagram. Just have a good bellyache.
That's the key point, because if we're sort of looking at the broader experience of anything really, is that if you're going to take it too seriously, you're missing out on this whole spectrum that existence is a little bit absurd in itself anyway, isn't it? So if you can't acknowledge the humour that closely aligns itself with the tragedy of absurdity, you're missing out on living a little bit.
Exactly. And that's what you get in the old stories of the Zen masters, or even in even in the Platonic texts, they're full of jokes. One of the great works of initiation is, of course, the great classical novel The Golden Ass, which is just absolutely hilarious. It's there's a laugh at every page, but it's very, very serious. It's probably the best guide to initiation you'll ever read.
Thank you for chatting. It's been lovely.
No worries. Thank you. I found that really, really interesting. I hope I didn't yabber on too much. We certainly covered a lot of ground.
No, not at all. I think that's what it's for. It's a space for us just to have a conversation, really. And I think the main reason I started doing this is to challenge this sort of emerging feeling as a near 30 and feel like I've got no friends and feeling isolated in the world. Which, you know,
it happens.
Is statistically like a very common social problem, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, your friends have babies, they disappear into that. It happens. Or you start to think you've got a lot of friends, and then you realise that they're all on Facebook. You haven't seen any of them in real life for 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway,
and you still feel like you've got this ongoing relationship. You've again, your magical thinking has gone the wrong way.
Yeah. Right. All right then.
Excellent.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.